Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Jojy.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. I'm with Elisa Marie today, and we're talking about this sense of toxic confidence or people who walk around like they own the world without any sort of expertise or anything, but it's sort of their swagger that is their calling card to be able to talk about anything with confidence when there are other people who do actually have expertise and the general public is doubting the credentials of the experts. And so I found this article really interesting. It was in the New York Times Sunday, March 29th. And so I've held on to it for a while. But what it made me think about was I tend to be somebody who's a little bit, I'm definitely confident in what I know, but I don't try to take all the air out of a room when I walk in there. I like to give everybody turns to talk and be respectful of people and let everybody have a chance to say their piece in a discussion. But this is really talking about the fact that modesty or being humble is really going to work against you because you've got to be out there like the only spotlight in the sky. And so anyway, I thought it was an interesting conversation, and I'm going to let Elisa talk about what she thinks about this conversation, and hopefully we can go from there.
So I think when I first kind of heard this, I was like, okay. I think that there definitely needs to be a balance of like having confidence, especially, I talked a little bit about like I'm moving into, more of a leadership and like different position than I kind of have had before. And so I do think that there's a certain level of confidence that is expected. But from my understanding of kind of what we talked about before we got on here, there are people who we're not talking about like climbing the ladder in your work and things like that. We're talking about people who kind of come in confident, but actually don't have a way to back that. And we see that. I have seen it many times, and I think that it's really problematic in that person, coming in and presenting themselves as more experienced or more knowledgeable than they really are. It's not only problematic in that they're putting out maybe information that's not correct or that can be harmful in some ways, but then also, it's frustrating for those who do have that knowledge to even counteract that. You can't be like, oh, actually they don't have, you have to almost undermine them or like shine light on the falseness of what they're saying. And I think that that's such a hard thing to do. So I think that goes to the points of like, the actual experts are now having to argue and say, no, this is wrong because there's this person out there saying, I know better, yet they really don't. They don't know better. And quite frankly, the information that they're saying could be problematic.
Right. And so, the article really talks a lot about, just social media and people who are now on social media speaking from a place of expertise when they may or may not be really somebody who should be talking about it, and that there's this wide range of people that are listening to like a TikTok or reading Substack or, any of those kinds of things and taking their word as golden when they might be doing the exact opposite. A couple of weeks ago, I also heard a podcast about the fact that diplomacy and what was years in the making, when we're talking about negotiating deals to avoid war and things like that. Like, we've got real estate moguls going out there and in negotiating war treaties when it's do they come from the right perspective, right? If you're going to try to come from a place of getting the best deal or coming out ahead, is it really the skill set you need for negotiating a treaty to avoid war? And so there really seems to be like something in the environment right now where there's this level of confidence to get the job done, but is it really the outcome that we want? We've got people talking about medical expertise that have no medical background. And to your point, Elisa, and this started a little bit with COVID, where, the CDC was getting attacked because it seemed like nothing the CDC was doing was correct. And you've got people arguing against experts who've spent their whole lives and their whole careers, educating people about different things like viruses and vaccinations. And people are now going toe to toe on to them. And I think that created or set the stage for now, 6 years later, where that's just, we live in a culture where that's just rampant. And so people are questioning, well, who are the experts? Because it feels like anybody who can speak with a certain amount of confidence or arrogance is going to convince you quite easily of what the quote unquote truth is. And so long have we passed the time where we had to, give references or citations for evidence for what you're saying. Now it's like if you present in a certain manner, it's like anything you're saying, your word, that's what's credible and not your credentials, your education, the accolades of your resume or, anything else, your publications, anything. It feels like now, anybody off the street can be perceived as an expert because you have 1 million followers or 100,000 followers, and yet you may be totally making things up. I mean, it sort of also makes me think of ChatGPT and the warnings that they talk about, like AI is good for certain things, but it also doesn't know how to spell strawberry, which is something my husband mentioned, like 5 months ago, and I didn't understand it. And it's quoted in this article about the fact that if you ask ChatGPT how many R's there are in strawberry, it'll tell you it's 1. And so you can argue with ChatGPT as well. And so it feels like we are more willing to take a risk on being completely wrong instead of trusting people who have a demonstrated record of competency.
Right. And I think that that makes it hard as a consumer or as, the general public, like you said, to know what is true. I mean, if we go back to COVID and, people are saying like, we need to wear a mask. And then there was other people who were saying, no, wearing a mask actually like is problematic. And it's like, well, these are two very strong conflicting messages, and not knowing which one is correct or which one, like people had to essentially, I think that's where the divide started. And, and now as a society I was listening to a speaker a couple weeks back who said like, we're more united than we think. But I do feel like in this day and age, we do feel very divided in a lot of topics, a lot of issues, because of the fact that it's like, you're either on one side of the fence or you're not. And you have to kind of like choose what aligns best with where you feel like there is accuracy and correctness versus a unified kind of pool of information and everybody's on the same page. I think that that's something that we have moved away from because of the lack of consistency and knowing and being able to say, yeah, this is correct, this is accurate versus not. And I think that that's such an unfortunate thing. So both from like just a general and the rules change and things, it's hard to know which way is up when you have all this information coming at you and you have these individuals who are saying, no, I'm correct, no, I'm correct, and you don't know who is correct, and you'd like to bank on the people who have the degrees and have the expertise, but then sometimes, they have an alternative motive or an alternative, reason for saying what they are. And so I think that it creates such a conundrum. And I don't know, Joji, if you have an opinion of like, how do you make sense of all of that? Because we have these people with this toxic confidence.
Yeah, I don't think I have a response to it as much as I worry about the middle schoolers and the high schoolers that are going to be out in the world, because I feel like how do we as as their, future bosses, or if you're parents, or, I mean, if we as parents are now negated by what we tell these children, or like teachers, or, employers, if we have no credibility in these people from these younger people, because they're growing up in this environment where anybody can have a microphone and act like they are the expert. And it's like that will get them through. And as you and I were talking about it, like I made me think about, and I'm thinking about my daughter because it's her birthday today. And so like I was thinking about when I was raising them, like it's hard for me to, like, what would I tell them now? Like, go out there and act like you own the world. Um, you know, I was raised to teach manners and cooperativeness, and everybody take a turn and be respectful. And now I sort of feel like if you want your child to stand out, do you tell them? Are you are you coaching your children to have this toxic confidence? Which obviously, as a parent, I know, or as a grandparent that I am today, I don't think I would ever tell my grandchildren or anybody else, like, yes, when I say fake it till you make it, if you're anxious and you have to go out there and talk on the stage, yeah, I might give them tips on how to overcome that anxiety. But am I going to say, well, this is the way you should live your life? Like, you know, take the spotlight, like, don't share, don't be cooperative, do whatever you can to go out there and be the only one that people are keeping their eye on. Because I sort of feel like, is that what these people were told to do, whether it was by their PR people or the people that are holding them up, some of these people who are on social media? Or is it that they give themselves license to act like that when nobody has really supported them? And that has given them the followers or the trust of people, so that they just continue feeding off of that. I'm not sure what came first, but I think that you would be in quite the, dilemma if you are raising these kids today. And so I guess throwing it on you a little bit, Alyssa, since you've got kids that are coming up, and your oldest is a middle schooler, what are your thoughts about how are you going to teach your children now in the next, couple of years? I mean, are you going to alter your strategy, or are you going to stay the course? I'm curious.
No, I mean, I think that it's gonna my overly optimistic self is coming out for a moment, because I honestly think that like the truth will come out. So I do not I encourage my children to talk about what they know, to have confidence in what they're saying, and to have confidence in who they are. But I don't promote them to try to like overwhelm other people, or like make themselves shine. Like I want them to be successful, but I don't need my child to be like the top softball player and run over other people in order to get to the top. Like I want to teach my children to, work hard, do what you need to do, but also have humility. And that's something that's really important to me to like ingrain in them. And so I don't encourage them to do that, and definitely not to like say, like my son's very good at coding, and he, I'm like, okay, let's learn more. Like, how can we do it? And he's like, oh, I got 50 followers on this website. And he was so proud of himself. I was like, that's great. So what's the next step? And he was like, I think I'll take a break from being on that website. I was like, great. Because like he had a goal, met his goal. And then it wasn't like, okay, now I need 100, 200. Like it didn't continue from this coding website that he's on. And I was actually really proud of him that he wasn't just like, oh, well, now I need to like build this up more. And so I think that for me, I'm not encouraging that toxic confidence. I'm encouraging humility, confidence in yourself, because I think that that will go a long way. And I think that going back to your point about, these people who, like, somebody's obviously encouraging them, but I think the wrong people are encouraging them. I think that the people that are saying like, yeah, let's go, like they have a hand in the pot, and they, might think like, if we get this person to the top, then, maybe we can make money off of it, whatever it is. But I do think that it's going to come out that at some point, like society is going to say, okay, this person doesn't have any credibility. We're going to stop listening to them. That's my hope. I don't know how we quite get there, except for, to be, again, like a thoughtful consumer of information from time to time, because I think that there is just so much out there that, really just is so unfortunate, that there's information out there that just really doesn't align with what we know to be true.
The one thing I wanted to say when you were talking about, how you using your example of your son, what it made me think about was this idea about the long game. Those of us who have been in a career and have, I'm just thinking of a work situation, but also that sense of credibility. I mean, it takes time to build credibility. And I think what's important in, I guess, what I'm thinking about now in this conversation is the difference between, is it going to be a short-term goal or is this a long-term, the long game, right? Because I think some of social media and people go viral and then you never hear from them, like almost like the one-hit wonder. And I guess what I'm thinking about is if the one-hit wonder has ever taught me anything, it's like, yeah, if you think you're going to get that notoriety or that money or whatever, you might have it for a short period of time, but does it really lend itself for a sustained, career or a certain length of time? And so I think that is sort of what your example of your son made me think about, is that I think the job that we have is to teach our kids, is sort of that ongoing sustainability, that it's not enough to be hot one minute and cold the next minute. I mean, it's sort of like, the hare versus the turtle kind of a thing. The one who wins the game is the one wins the race is the person who's going to, take their time and get there on a consistent basis. And I think right now, what is so mainstream is this sort of like flash in the pants, like, there's this sort of meteor type of rise, and then you never hear from them, but boy, do they get a lot of attention for a short period of time. And that is not something that is going to serve, our children well, that's for sure. I don't know about some of these people that are, mainstream social media people. I'm not hugely on social media, so I don't know, like, can they recreate themselves from like one social media to another? I don't know the mechanics of that, but I think that's what I was thinking about is, isn't it better for us to teach our kid the long game versus sort of like, okay, you're successful today and then nobody knows you 3 days from now? That I think is more heartbreaking because you have that notoriety and then it's taken away from you just as quickly as you got it. So I think there's a little bit of danger in that kind of a setup for failure as well. So the one thing that this article also talked about connected to what we're talking about before we started this was what you had talked about, the manosphere, and what, is that connected to this or is that a separate conversation? And the one thing that this article talked about was sort of the aggressively macho political posturing, and cultivated humility seems almost like trite or what's the word? I don't know. Trite is the only word I can think of in this article that it uses. Almost like, it's almost like you're going out of your way to be humble when everybody else is really aggressive. And so I do feel like this conversation does butt into that idea of like very aggressive men and what they talk about and how they express themselves and their level of opinion and being opinionated about things that are, maybe more gender specific. But I think it would be best to maybe save that for another conversation. But I do feel like this article does address the question that you had raised to me before we started this podcast, is whether they're similar or they're different. And so I think that there's challenges when it comes to, in different situations, because now people are so comfortable being aggressive in debating other people if they disagree with you. I was in a situation where two of us or three of us were talking about another person who was going to join this conversation. And we knew that this other person was going to be like doggedly against what we were talking about. And so we were sort of supporting each other and saying, hey, when we have this conversation, we have to be very rigid in our stance because we know this other person is going to poke holes in the conversation. And I found it really interesting when I stepped back from that situation during this conversation to be like, gosh, we have to like preemptively think about how we're going to debate. Three of us are going to debate this one person on a conversation where we three know that we are right based on evidence and based on just some guidelines that we were referring to. And yet we were trying to be very thoughtful about how to give this like no weakness, no crack of opportunity for this one person to come in and attack our comments. And what I found is that in order to be that ready to have that fight, almost a verbal fight, we needed to not have any opening for this other person to break down our discussion or our main points. And I found that to be really interesting because I think when you're talking as a group, there you might put a waiver out there like, you know what, this is not 100% of the time, or, this is accurate most of the time. But if we opened that door, we fully expected this person to charge in and rip our strategy apart, even though we knew we were right based on the evidence that we were going to be presenting and the documentation we had. But that actually struck me as really interesting that when you have a strong personality, and so the flip side of this conversation, Elisa, is that there have always been people who had strong opinions. And maybe they were legitimate opinions and maybe they were based in fact, but we've always had people that we disagreed with. So that's not a new phenomenon. The phenomenon is that today, whether you are right and they are wrong, that there are people who will believe the person who is wrong purely on their presentation or their posturing or the way that they communicate their ideas. And I found it shocking that we were being very defended and really chose our words carefully as a way to make sure that there was no opening for attack. And I don't think that there was another time that I have been so ready in a casual conversation to take on this person and not let any vulnerability seep through. And so I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but I'm curious to hear if you've ever been in a situation like that.
I mean, I haven't specifically been in that type of situation. I think, I mean, part of my job is to argue my opinion on things. And so I think in some ways I have like I know what you're talking about. And like, I try to very much present myself in a way that, and I am as an expert, explaining my opinion and why I base it upon that. But I also have learned the other part of that is I'm going to say what I believe based upon my, clinical judgment, all of that to these parties. And then they can do with it as they please. And so that's like, I come from that framework of like, you can, think that I'm correct or you can think that I'm not correct. It's not my job to necessarily convince you as much as it's to give you knowledge and then you run with that. So I think it's slightly different in that I think that there is worth in giving people information. But I think at the end of the day, kind of like you were saying before, like people are going to make their decisions based upon whatever it is, whether it's like, how the person looked versus like the credibility of the information. I think that that's like coming full circle. That's the problem with toxic confidence is that at the end of the day, it may not matter what the person's saying. If they have the ability to convince others, they may be more credible just on that alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think about now, you know, the, some of the crazy stuff that was, floated out there instead of getting the COVID vaccination. I remember there was this fish food and people could eat fish food. And I think people died as a result of that. And now with the measles, I mean, a disease that was almost eradicated is now, really making a comeback in a negative way. And there are children dying, all over the country. And all the warnings that the experts put out there that, these things are really important. And I think that what makes me sad is that those people are still going to die. Parents are still going to lose children because they didn't get vaccinations. And, if that was me and I was out there putting that information out there, I would feel this burden of responsibility that people lost their lives because of stuff that I was just making up. But it doesn't appear that those individuals that are out there putting out misinformation really take any, iota of responsibility for the fact that they have influence. And this sort of goes back to another conversation I've had over the years with like celebrities, and a lot of celebrities saying, hey, I didn't choose to be a role model. Like just because I'm a celebrity and they look up to a character I played on a movie or on a TV show doesn't mean that that character is telling you how to live your life. And some celebrities have felt caught in this, catch 22 because people admire them, young people admire them, and they're like, hey, it's just a character. I'm not advocating that this or that happen. And so sometimes I've heard celebrities sort of put some distance between themselves and their characters who are maybe putting out there into the universe something that they may not agree with, or the fact that they're surprised that so many people are following that lead when really young people need to be taught, or they should know that, hey, this is a fictional character and it should not be taken in the manner that they are taking it. So I feel like this is a very difficult situation where it's like all these different aspects of all the different bad things that could happen are like happening. And so I find it very disturbing. And I don't know how do you come back from something like this? Like, I mean, we won't have, as you said, the truth will come out in time. So we'll have these people who are discredited. We already have experts who are discredited. So does that create an opportunity for another person to take the lead that we can't trust? Or does that mean that in some fashion that the experts will get like recredentialed in credibility? Or I don't know. I feel very, and because I'm not one of these toxic, confident people, it's like, well, who is going to be the person that we follow in the future? And I don't mean politics wise. I mean in any situation. Who's going to rise to the top, and how do we know that they are the right person to lead a company, to lead a friendship group, to lead an organization, to lead a country, to lead, a movement? Like how do we know? Because it feels like we've gone through all these, like, I hate to be biblical, but false gods. I mean, how do we know who that right person is going to be?
Right. And I think that that's the problem. So I think we really haven't answered the question, but the question is like, how do we figure out what to, what to put our time and energy and opinion into, and how do we do that? So I think that, we've essentially asked the question and answered it with another question, but I think that's something that we probably aren't going to answer today. But it's a good way of looking at this. And so I think this is probably a continuation, or it will be a continuation of a discussion going forward. So I probably, I think, Jojy, we've kind of talked about it in a lot of different ways. And so I think at this point, I'll let you close us out. But I think that we haven't answered the question, but I think that we've posed a good question that hopefully our listeners will kind of take and give us feedback on too, of what they think or how they manage news and experts and things like that.
Yep. I think having more questions is probably the only thing we can have. And our listeners have been giving us feedback lately. And so, listeners, please, I'm sure that this is going to inflame a couple of you. So, please share with us your thoughts. We've been very excited to have a following of people who are talking to us and responding to us. And so I expect Virginia and Dominica and others that have been giving us feedback to continue doing that. And we invite the rest of you to do that as well, because we are thrilled to have this feedback. And Alyssa and I will talk about how to bring up some of the feedback that we've had. And maybe we do an episode on the questions that our listeners have brought up to us. I'm still trying to think through that. And so, as always, give us your feedback. Please give us a review. Share this with other people, because it's very exciting to know that we're reaching a larger group of people. So until next time, signing off for Alyssa, Marie, and Jojy. We'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.